Hi, I'm Cassidy. I'm the product manager for A Quilty Little Christmas, and I'm excited to show you our new designs from Kimberbell. Today we're going to be doing a tutorial for the Christmas tree that is going to be found on our third quilt in our gallery wall design. This is such a fun project. There are so many mini quilts that come together to create a beautiful design for your wall. And here we're going to cover the Christmas tree block because this one has a lot of fancy embellishments that we wanted to pay a little extra attention to and do a little tutorial on how to work with some of the materials that you'll see. So this block really does not look finished without our embellishment kit that we sell separately alongside our CD and book combo. We've got custom buttons, ribbon, rhinestones, and velveteen. And we're going to be talking a lot about velveteen here today. So without further ado, we'll get started. We're going to start by doing option 1 on the instructions, which is the block by block quilting. You have a few options, but we're going to go with block by block quilting today. So we're going to start out by doing the quilting on our block. So step 1, I've got my hoop loaded. We are going to be using 2 files in our machine when using this option. We are going to load a quilting file. For us, it is going to be the 6x8 design for Christmas 14. It's KDQ343. Okay, so when you're overlapping these files, you want to double check in your machine. Make sure that your quilting comes first and then your design comes second. So I'm double checking here in my machine steps. You can see option 1, there's my batting placement line. Batting tack down. And here is my quilting. Then as we keep going, we get into the design. You see my Christmas tree trunk come through. And all those steps for the design. So just make sure that lays out. I mean, if you want to jump steps, you sure can, but it makes it a lot easier to make sure that it's all in order from the start. Okay, so we're going to stitch our batting placement line. And I'm doing this in green because we're going to use that for the quilting and also so that it's visible on camera. Okay, we're going to remove the hoop. Place this over here. And we're going to place our batting down. My batting size is a little large, but it will do the trick. Just make sure it's clearing over that stitch line nicely. Because we will trim away the excess. We're going to do our tack down for our batting. And remember, if you ever get messed up in your machine steps, if the machine goes over twice, that's a tack down line. If it just sweeps over once, that's a placement line. So right now we're tacking that batting down. We want that batting to stay put. So we're going over it twice. Okay, we're going to remove the hoop and we're going to trim the batting. I'm being a little bit wasteful here. We probably could have gone with a smaller size, but here we are. And I like to pull the batting away as I cut. I feel like it helps my scissors out. So they just run straight through. Okay, now we're going to stitch our placement line for that fabric. Okay, we're going to remove the hoop. Okay, now that I have that fabric placement line, I'm going to place my fabric. Make sure you prepare it with fusible backing on back. It just helps it maintain its structure. Also make sure you starch it good. That's always really important, especially with those first few layers of fabric. Want them to hold their form well. Okay. So remember how I mentioned earlier that a tack down line will go over twice and then a placement line will go over once? This is one of the few exceptions to that rule. When we're doing block by block, we're just getting that fabric down, but later we're going to trim around this line. This stitch isn't integral to the overall construction of the quilt. We'll be trimming along it. So if it goes over once, that's what's going on with the block by block. This is probably one of my favorite quilting designs that came with this project. It's got these ornaments that we'll see in our quilts, and just it flows so nicely. Beautiful. Now that we've done our quilting, we're going to move on to the embroidery instructions. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to stitch the trunk placement line. Because this tree trunk is done in pink, I am going to change my thread color to pink. One thing that is important to know about our placement lines is they will not be visible in the final product. So if you use a weird color, usually you're okay if you don't go crazy and use something that's really strong and bright. So we're going to do our trunk placement line. Okay, and then we're going to place our fabric for our tree trunk. And we have fusible backing on the back of this. We recommend doing fusible backing on all fabrics with this quilt. But this one it's especially important because if you don't use fusible backing, you will be able to see the plaid through that fabric. So it helps that color hold its own a little bit. This piece is so tiny and cute. Okay, I'm going to remove the hoop, remove the tape, and I'm going to trim close to the stitch line. Now when I'm using smaller pieces of fabric, I kind of like to use my snips, use a smaller pair of scissors. Okay, so a satin stitch is going to go over top of this. And when I'm doing satin stitches, I always want to make sure that I'm as close to the stitch line as possible without cutting the stitches, just so that that edge of the fabric doesn't peek through our satin stitch. Now I'm going to do my tree placement line, and since this isn't going to be in a visible thread color, I'm going to switch to the next color that is required in the instruction sheets. So that's that pine color that we offer in our thread kit. So I'm going to put pine into my machine. It'll also be easier to see over this green plaid on camera. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about Velveteen for a second. We love using Velveteen. It just offers a texture and a softness to our quilts that can be unmatched in some designs. And we do a lot of fun things with it as we're doing these. There's a stamp design that combines with a fill stitch and is beautiful. But one of the not so fun things about Velveteen is it likes to shed. As you can see, it's pilling a little bit onto my block. It's nice to keep a lint roller handy so you can sweep those up. And another thing I would recommend is when you get your embellishment kit to apply fray check to the edges. It will keep that pilling from even starting up. So I'm going to place this down over my placement line, and I'm going to tape it. And another thing with Velveteen is because it's so fuzzy, it doesn't stick very well. So I like to be generous with my tape. Okay. Now that I have that placed, I am going to tack it down. And don't stress if you accidentally go over your tape a little bit. Okay, I'm going to remove my hoop, and I'm going to remove the tape. As you can see, I did not apply fray check to this one. Okay, and where I overlapped with my tape a little bit, I like to push down on that stitch line and just pull. It helps protect your stitches and also create good tension on that tape so it rips well. Now we're going to trim around the edges of the tree. Use my Kimberbell scissors. And just peel the Velveteen as you're trimming. And one thing to note, if you don't want to trim, an SVG file is also offered. More editing. Okay, now that I have that trimmed, we are going to go over the top with some wash away topping. Some things to know about wash away topping. When you get it all wrapped, that helps it store really nicely. One thing we do at Kimberbell is we store our wash away topping rolls in a Ziploc baggie so it's closed to the open air. It'll just preserve it and make it last longer so it doesn't age as fast. Okay, and wash away topping is very slippery. I know in the instructions there's this little small square of tape. We're going to go wide with that. We're going to use lots of tape. You can rarely be too generous with the tape. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to do a satin stitch around the edge of the tree. The reason we're doing the satin stitch over top of the wash away topping is it makes sure that the stitches don't sink into the velveteen, that they still stay up and pretty and visible. Next, we're going to stitch the garland details. Change out my thread. Next, we're going to stitch the holly leaves detail. So we're going to switch into our lighter green, just so those holly leaves stand out a little bit from the tree in the background. Our next step is going to be to stitch the berries detail. Now, we went back and forth when testing this on what we were going to do because we knew we wanted to add rhinestones to this design. And if you are adding rhinestones, I would still recommend to do this step. The reason being that it helps you know where to place your rhinestones to stitch these berry details. It also helps if you're gluing or if you're heat sealing, so you're not just heat sealing directly onto the velveteen. It helps that rhinestone adhere to your fabric a little bit better if you stitch these berries detail. I also would recommend that even though this thread isn't going to be crazy visible, that you use a red to do this, because if it does peek through, you don't want another color to compete with your embellishments. With that being said, we're going to stitch the berry details. Okay, now that we've done those berry details, we're going to remove the hoop. There is one more machine step that is offered, and this is a step that we are going to skip for this tutorial. But we offer the option to fill in the star that is going to be on top of the tree, or to use one of our custom buttons here that we offer in the embellishment kit. Because we're going to use the custom button, we are not going to fill in the star here. You can, and you can put it over top, but it makes it easier to hand sew that button in if you're not competing with a lot of fill stitches. We're now going to talk about wash away topping and how we're going to handle it from this point forward. What we're not going to do, but is really tempting, is we're not going to just douse this block to remove the wash away topping. We're going to remove the tape, and your needle has already done a lot of the work for you, but we're going to tear away the wash away topping rather than rinse it away. There are projects that we do that for. The reason we're not here is because if we do, we're going to get this goo that collects from the wash away topping dissolving, and it's going to adhere to the Velveteen really weird. So just gently tear it away as you go. And the nice thing about Velveteen is it can be very forgiving. So if it went outside your satin stitch, you can kind of almost fray it away like you see here on the top end of my Christmas tree. That's nearly gone, and I can go at it with tweezers a little bit later to finish it off and make it a little cleaner. So a few tricks you can use. You can kind of peel your fingers over the top like that and tear. Another thing you can do is grab your needle nose tweezers from Kimberbell and tear it that way. Kind of get under there. You can also use a seam ripper for this. Just make sure you're not puncturing your fabric too. These needle nose tweezers are really nice, but they can be sharp. Okay. And now, as I said before, we want to avoid the goo from the wash away topping as it dissolves away, but a little bit is not going to hurt. So my next step for these stragglers that you can see here in the corners of my berries that are just really small and kind of a pain to go in and get the small corners is I'm going to run a damp cotton swab over the top and just rub and spot check in those small places. My next step is going to be to remove this from the hoop, to trim this with my orange pop rulers, and to add my star custom button. Thanks for joining us for this tutorial. If you've enjoyed it, go ahead and like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.